Hi guys, this is Isobel Yeung here, a correspondent for Vice on HBO.
And I'm Jesko, a producer for Vice on HBO.
And we're here today to talk about our documentary Consent, which aired on Friday. I guess we start with talking about...
Well, we're taking your questions, but we'll just start.
Yeah. I guess we'll start with why we made this documentary. For me and for both of us, really, it's been a really personal journey. It's been a really tumultuous year of Me Too, almost a year exactly since the first Harvey Weinstein allegations poured out. And we really wanted to talk about, we wanted to add to that conversation, but we wanted to make something more nuanced and to really talk about how the topic of sexual consent plays out in our everyday lives, in our sex lives, in our dating lives, and to really move that conversation forward and to also talk about what accountability looks like, which has become even more relevant over the last few days.
Mm-hmm. And I would say the jumping off point for both of us was in talking about, and as you would see in the piece, the Aziz Ansari story and kind of like what that revealed about how there's like a, you know, how the spotlight is being put now on personal dating lives, and it's a different conversation we're having. And I mean, the truth is, I think that, as was said in the piece, and I would repeat myself, is like all of us have been in situations like that, and it like makes you think, like, is it time for a shift away from that? Like, are we finally getting the right words and the right way of talking about it?
Yeah,
so.
It's been one of those pieces that's been massively sparked by conversations that I've had with friends, conversations I've had with you, and has kind of grown from there. And massively sparked by the Aziz Ansari story, because that got us all talking about our own situations, the times that we've been in those grey areas, times that have been really uncomfortable for us. And those conversations are so uncomfortable to have. And they're also, they're really important to have. And it also makes it a really, really difficult documentary to make.
Yes.
Which I think we can both attest to, but particularly difficult to produce.
You know, I guess if I'm going to throw a question at you, it would be, did you decide ahead of time, that day that we were filming all those sit-down interviews, straight to camera, that you wanted to do your own story, or was that a spur-of-the-moment decision?
I mean, I knew I wanted to talk to camera, but I didn't know really what I was going to say. I think it was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing in that, you know, we asked so many people, really brave women and men, to come in and share their stories and to talk about what consent means for them, and personal experiences of when consent has been an issue. And really that led to just this moment of realizing you kind of have to, if you're asking so many people to do that, it's only really fair to acknowledge that this is a deeply personal story. It's not like other stories, and that it's impossible to completely detach yourself. You kind of have to talk about those experiences of yourself, to kind of declare any biases up front, and then to be able to move forward, hopefully with journalistic credibilities and all that in play. Somewhere in there.
I'd say you nailed it. Okay, we have some questions coming in from you guys. What was the hardest part about reporting this?
I mean, besides the personal stuff, which was obviously a hard aspect of this, I think that the very fact that we set out trying to make a documentary about the nuances of something.
Something you're not going to see.
Essentially makes that very difficult to make a visual documentary about, to make a film about. I mean, it's a much easier written piece than it is a visual documentary.
It was hard for us to choose the other elements. The restorative justice scene at the end was something we'd been looking for a long time. And I guess one of us read about it or something, and it was an interesting idea to us. And so that was a hard booking. We worked on it a long time. But the other elements, it was a negotiation. What should we include? What would be helpful to illuminate this? And like that, we took a long time to figure that out.
Yeah, a really long time, actually. How biased is this piece? I mean, as I said, I think we're all biased, and I think that question probably comes up because it is a more personal piece than others that we typically do. And as I said, I kind of wanted to acknowledge those biases up front. We all have our personal biases when it comes to anything. Obviously, this is a topic that I can empathize with certain subjects more than others. I don't think that necessarily takes away from our journalistic credibility or our ability to ask difficult questions. I think that, or I hope that is reflected through the piece.
Yeah, I mean, obviously your personal experiences play into your lines of questioning and stuff like that, but I think for this piece it actually enriched it because, you know, you empathize, you know what it's like, and it helps to like have that background knowledge to drive the conversation forward.
Right. I mean, obviously it's not a comfortable thing to, and when I watch the documentary back now, it's not a comfortable thing to watch me crying on screen. That's not really something that anyone wants to do.
That made you watch it 600 times.
Yeah. Nice close-up shots there. But what I would say is that it's a human story. It's not as simple as journalist and subject. There's a crossover in this with all of our lives, and especially over the last week or so with the Kavanaugh hearings, I think that has been more apparent than ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. What did Aziz Ansari do that is wrong? Well, I think that's the question, right? I mean, like...
That's something that we've debated back and forth for the last few months.
I mean, as the piece is written, let's go with, let's just like set that out, and which is like, you know, again, having an anonymous person tell it, not going to him for comment. These are journalistic problems with that piece. But as it's written, if we take that like for what it is, I mean, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, he could have been misreading cues, or maybe he's an overly pushy guy. I don't know. But as Dr. Lisa Feldman-Barrett in our documentary talked about, it is possible that two people can be in the same situation from a neuroscience perspective and have completely different accounts of what exactly happened there. And I think that that's important to remember because, I mean, I think that's probably just true.
Yeah, and I also think that Michelle Hope says it best, which is that there are so many different truths to that story, and it's not a case, it is a story at this point. And the bigger truth is that we don't teach men and women to communicate appropriately about sex.
I think that women often, and I'm speaking from my own experience, is like are told like it's not okay to say no in some situations. Like you feel like pressured, you don't want to make people mad. And I think that's part of the way that a lot of women were brought up, self-included, and it's just sort of cultural conditioning.
Yeah, that's one of the things we wanted to explore, like how does gender norms play into our very intimate sex lives?
Yeah, which I think we could have gotten into more, and we certainly did a lot of research on and talked a lot about, but I think they really do, and I think that it's hard to escape that as much as we want to, as much as we want to think that we've moved on, and like that's not a big deal anymore. And maybe it's not, I hope it's not, but like at least when I was in my like early 20s and stuff, yeah.
I guess when it comes to the question of bias as well, like we should address that obviously we're both women.
Right.
And a lot of the people working on this piece were women, not solely women, but
mostly,
I think that obviously that plays into it, and especially if we're talking about gender and how we feel. I think that one thing I've been thinking a lot more about is how the role of masculinity plays into all this. And one theme that kind of came up consistently is also for men that, you know, they're expected to be the aggressor or the initiator of sex. They're expected to be the ones that move things forward. And so where should the responsibility lie? And I mean, ultimately it lies on all of us. And in a case of two people having sex, on those two people. But it's interesting to see how that plays out as well.
Definitely. All right. I think this question's interesting. So, do you believe celebrities, for example, Louis C.K. and Aziz Ansari, can be forgiven, and should they have the ability to move on? Short answer, I would say, I guess yes. I mean, it's hard to know what to do with these guys, right? I mean, like these two in particular have been out of the public spotlight for almost a year. Like in like Louis C.K.'s case, less self-imposed, but I would say Aziz Ansari's case, pretty self-imposed. And I think now there is a larger question of how are they going to come back into the public world?
Or do they even need to come back into the public world as well, is a question.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, I mean, and some people would say they shouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if they approach their situations head on, I mean, Aziz Ansari, it's kind of confusing, but like let's say Louis C.K. If he just approaches it head on and like really talks about it, which I could see a comedian like Louis C.K. doing. I'd be interested to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult, isn't it? Because, I mean, a lot of people would say that he doesn't deserve to come back into the public eye and that he should pay with as much time to reflect on things as much time as he's inflicted pain on the people that he's been accused of doing so on. I also saw that he had another event last night or yesterday.
Really?
Yeah. So clearly he thinks he should come back into the public eye, and he's got something to say about it. But I do think that like one thing we wanted to touch on in this piece is that it's not really, there's so much noise on both sides of this topic, which also makes it very difficult to make a documentary about. And what we really wanted to do is kind of break through that noise, break through that like massive partisanship that's been playing out, especially in the last few days, and to kind of get to, what does accountability look like, which is the whole second part of this documentary, which is how can we expect to move on? How can we move this conversation forward, both for survivors of sexual assault or any situation, as well as for perpetrators of that? I mean, it is important to have these nuanced conversations with people, which is something that we try to do at the end of our piece, and which is so rarely seen, I think.
And I think it was it was amazing to be in that room. The conversation was obviously a lot longer than what aired. And it's like these conversations I feel like they need to happen in some way. Like they just need to, like, we need to discuss this kind of stuff, because it's like in not discussing it. If like Louis C.K. wanted to come back and wasn't willing to talk about this, like I'd be a lot less inclined to be like a fan again.
Right.
You know what I mean? But if he addressed it, I think I'd be like, it depends on how he did. But like I felt like it was like a good.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree that I think people taking responsibility and accountability is what we're ultimately looking for.
We haven't like seen a huge amount of that, and like this past year has been insane, obviously, and like so many famous men have met their downfalls and stuff like that. We don't see a lot of taking responsibility. And it's really refreshing when you see it, which is like, I
mean, I understand why as well. I mean, it is a very partisan political time, and it's difficult to talk about this stuff. And it's very difficult to do it in the right way, and there's so many potential landmines to walk on. And every case and every story as well is very different.
Right.
So it's different for each of them. But yeah, it's been a real roller coaster, and it's very difficult to talk publicly about any of that stuff.
I think like maybe the needle will really start to move on this whole discussion when men do start coming forward and owning up to things and stuff like that. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. What was the most surprising thing you found while reporting? I mean, I think that, I don't know if it's surprising at this point. I think I was surprised throughout the last few months by the sheer number of people who are willing to share their stories and to talk in public.
True.
It has been a real watershed moment. I mean, in the last year and in the last week or so itself, like even more momentum behind this. And I mean, that is in some ways massively comforting to know that so many people are with you on this. Also completely terrifying, because so many people have experienced trauma. And as we know, that trauma can be lasting and impactful and painful.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw that play out during the Kavanaugh hearings last week, and I guess that maybe that is the answer. It's like how many stories there are out there. Like it really wasn't difficult for us to find people to come in to our studio and just talk to a camera basically about their own experiences. And I really appreciate that, and I'm glad that everyone's talking about this right now. I think it's a really important thing to talk about. But yeah, and the bravery to share our stories is great, including you.
What was the definition of consent different for the genders? I think it's interesting because the definition of consent seems to be different for everyone.
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to get a consensus on. Yeah. I mean, we did do a scene that ended up being a Vice News Tonight piece instead of as part of this film, that we went to a high school and talked to groups of girls and groups of guys about what they think about consent. And I mean, I think fundamentally everyone understands the concept of consent. What's different is how they think it should be like talked about. Like it was interesting because those kids were saying, the guys were saying that girls will say no when they mean yes, and they seem very confused about that. But everyone seemed to understand the concept, at least. And also they were talking about it, which is something I definitely never did in high school.
Yeah, people are definitely more woke now.
Yeah.
People are more aware.
Yeah.
I did not even know what consent meant at that age, I think, because I just
It wasn't like a
even
term
thought
that
about
was
it.
used a lot. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm glad to hear that that's like it seems to be a big curriculum factor for a lot of people.
Yeah, I would say not enough still. I mean, one thing that we didn't get into in our piece and that we talked a lot about is sex education and consent education, which is something that is being brought into some classrooms around the country, but arguably not enough, and arguably the lack of education in that area is one of the reasons that we find ourselves in this moment right now.
Yeah. But it's heartening because you never know, like maybe things will change, you know?
Yep.
All right, I think we just answered that one. Where is the male perspective? I mean, it isn't. I agree it's not super loud in the film, but I think that some of the points that we make aren't specific to either gender. It's more about figuring out like how we can create a new language around consent that people can actually talk about it.
I don't know. I feel like we worked really hard in the second part of that piece to bring a male voice into that. Like that scene was very difficult to get with this restorative justice session, and we knew that in order for that to work, we really needed to have the male perspective. We really needed to have that voice. We wanted to hear how two parties could experience the same event, and one to believe that it is non-consensual sex and one to believe it's consensual sex. And we wanted to try and bridge that gap and to highlight that and to also begin a discussion. And I have had pretty positive feedback from men and women from this documentary who have been talking about how it has made them think about their own experiences or how they could get in these situations. So I hope that it stirs something of a conversation between men and women as well.
Right, yeah, totally. I mean, I think looking forward, we have to, that has to be a big part of it. I mean, if in a heteronormative relationship, it's like a man and a woman involved, right? And that's, I don't know. It's like, I do think it's an important voice to have. I think we tried to get it. But I agree that it's a necessary thing to move the needle forward.
I think we've touched on this. Is consent being taught in schools? Touched on that. Is it hard to convince sources to go on camera with their stories? Yes and no.
Yeah. I mean, the final scene in the film, it was really hard. That was a long negotiation, a lot of phone calls. But ultimately, I mean, I could tell that both parties involved wanted to do it. And it was just a matter of how we could figure out how to make that work. But yeah, it was extremely hard to find, for obvious reasons, like people who are willing to talk about a situation she saw as rape and he saw as consensual sex on camera together, for the world to see. But I'm really glad they did, and I think that we've heard from them since. It seems that they thought we did them justice, so that's nice. But yeah, I mean, I think it was a really powerful thing to have, and I'm really glad we got it. But other than that, I mean, not really. It was actually pretty easy to get people to talk about their experiences, which, as Isobel said, is either great or also kind of horrifying at the same time, because you're like, wow, this is everywhere.
I think it was easy to a point, as in, given what's happened over the last few months and the last year or so, so many people are having this conversation as we are. And so people do want to talk about it, and we were able to provide something of a platform for that. Yeah, I think that from the other side of it, and in terms of taking any accountability and responsibility, that was obviously a lot harder thing to do. Or not, I wouldn't say harder, actually. I think that it's a totally different ball game. And you open yourself up to a whole new set of criticisms and quite rightly, and judgments and et cetera, and we will have our right to do that. But so I think, it's two-sided, that answer.
Sure. All right, you want to do the last one?
Sure.
How do you see the conversation shifting from talking about it to acting on it? Or is a big awareness campaign enough right now?
I think that, I would actually say that in the last few days, it seems like the Me Too movement has opened a new chapter, right? And that we our awareness is definitely there. There's no turning back from that. I mean,
everyone's aware.
Whatever happens in the Kavanaugh hearings, I mean, I think that there is this massive awareness now about consent, about sexual assault. I think everyone is having those conversations in America, at least. I think where we go from that now is this question of accountability and what do we want that to look like? What are our options? Because let's face it, there aren't a whole lot of options. Like exploring restorative justice is the thing that we came across when we were desperately searching for any other way to move forward.
Yeah, basically, like, what do people do when they've been in this gray zone area and the two people see it differently, and like how do you deal with that outside of the criminal justice system? And that was our biggest question, and this was mainly the only thing we found. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot of options out there.
Yeah,
at least not like formal ones.
Right. I'd say that going from talking about it to acting on it just requires all of us to kind of self-reflect and come to some reckoning about our own experiences and our own pasts.
And correcting mistakes and like behaving differently going forward.
Right.
And making sure that, I don't know, making sure that you're sure of your consent, I guess, you know?
Yeah, and to talk about that and to communicate, really. I think that's what has been missing for so long. And to communicate with, obviously, bravery and vulnerability and openness, which I think is hopefully something we touched on in this piece.
Great. Well, we're going to stream the whole documentary for you guys right now, so we hope you like it. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Can you tell us about a sexual encounter where consent was an issue?
Yeah, I think over the course of my life, as with a lot of my friends, and I'm sure a lot of women, there have been many.
It was my freshman year. It was around the fall, so I just got settled into my dorm room.
I was very drunk, and I asked a friend for a ride home.
I liked this person liked me, and, you know, you begin to make out.
He started kissing me, and I was like, okay, that's all right.
And then all of a sudden it's an energy shift.
But then he started to undress me, and
he had his hand on my head, and he kind of like pushed it.
And it becomes less about you as a person and more of you as a thing.
He like had just sort of like put himself inside me without me saying anything. And then when I started saying no, he sort of was like, shh.
In my head, I was like, no, 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 no. But,
you know, no was never really a factor in whether or not it was going to happen.
I felt like if I kept trying, that something worse would happen. So I eventually just kind of let it happen.
Every single woman I know has stories like that where she's just sort of like let her body be used because it was just easier or it felt safer.
I remember when I was about 18 and there was this guy who was a friend of mine who I just thought was the most beautiful person in the world. And we had gone out one night, we'd been drinking a lot, and it wasn't until I kind of turned around and saw him naked and he started taking my clothes off and pushing my head down that I realized that not a tiny part of me wanted to do that. I remember saying to him, I don't really want to have sex. And I also remember him kind of taking that as a cue to convince me. It's only really now that this moment of cultural reckoning has come about that I think so many of us are thinking about our own experiences and our own sexual encounters. And it's those kind of conversations, most of which have been taking place behind closed doors between myself and my friends, that I thought, you know, it's a good time to explore what consent really means, which is the reason I wanted to make this documentary.
Hello. Aren't you in the wrong room, Mr. Bond?
Growing up, I learned about love and romance through movies like James Bond, where the heroes spend their time in the relentless pursuit of women, which is seen as a sexy ideal. But off-screen, Hollywood itself has been changing.
Now to the latest on Harvey Weinstein. The New York Times reporting allegations by numerous women who say
Nearly a year ago, the Harvey Weinstein scandal unleashed a flood of allegations that became known as the Me Too movement. It began with stories of workplace sexual harassment that implicated scores of powerful men and impacted countless institutions around the world, including Vice. In this moment of extraordinary reckoning, these personal encounters could have enormous political consequences.
major breaking news about Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation.
A woman says the president's U.S. Supreme Court nominee assaulted her when she and Kavanaugh were both in high school.
But Me Too has also created a more nuanced cultural debate. For me, it was one woman's anonymous account of a confusing sexual encounter with the actor Aziz Ansari that hit a nerve, begging the question, what constitutes sexual consent? Jessica Bennett, gender editor at the New York Times, explained why this story stood out from the rest. What were your thoughts when the Aziz Ansari expose came out?
I've been in this situation, and most people I know have too. You know, journalistically, I thought there were a lot of problems with how the reporting was done, how it was delivered, but that case opened up a really important conversation that needed to happen alongside or within Me Too at large, which is that there are these sort of murkier, gray area situations.
To be honest, I think that a lot of us, myself included, hadn't really thought about it until the Aziz Ansari thing came out. And then it was like, oh, was that situation?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us, all genders, are looking back on past experiences with a new lens now. And you can't really put this back to the way it was. Like, Harvey Weinstein began this conversation, but it's not a new conversation.
The Me Too movement actually began in communities of color, years before Harvey Weinstein's A-list accusers propelled it to international infamy.
Hello? Hello? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen! How many of you are ready for a great night?
Michelle Hope is a sexologist whose mission is to bring the movement right back to where it started.
Some of you might be like, wait a minute. What is a sexologist? And bitch, where did you go to school? Dick sucking university? But in all actuality, I look at how human sexuality plays a part in our daily lives. So now I got the nerdy shit out the way. Let's talk about pussy.
We joined her during a live taping of the popular sex podcast, Horrible Decisions, where she was the special guest.
So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna read some scenarios, right? And these people are gonna say, it's a go, I don't know, it's a no. Because oftentimes the gray area is a space we don't talk about. Mm-hmm. All right, so here we go. Taquanda and Terrence met on a Tinder date. She was pleased with the conversation and decided to have sex with him that night. In the morning, Taquanda woke up before her partner and decided she wanted to give him a blowjob while he was sleeping. Is that consensual or not? Oh.
Listen, I'm gonna be honest. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna wake you up anyway. I want to suck that dick.
For sure. It's okay. Y'all can do whatever y'all want to do to us, really. It's okay. That's the double standard.
So I said this to the back. If I already sucked your dick, I'm gonna suck it within 24 hours. Like, bro, let me suck it. Like,
Look, I see the man in the audience like thumbs down. Not consensual. Not consensual. All right,
if I don't want the dick in the morning,
tell me what you're feeling.
You leave it.
Nope. It's not consensual. And that's the double standard when it comes to men and women.
Oh,
the thing is that when you're a man, it's assumed that you're the aggressor and that you take initiative. Nope. But when you're the woman, you're the submissive. So now what happens is that when women take a dominant position, because they're women and we're men, we're supposed to accept it. But if I don't get a yes, it's a no, right? So if you don't get a yes, it's a no.
I like this
so
guy.
if you want to wake up and suck my dick and you to get a yes, it's a no. So no. If you doing it in a way that you... The thing is, though, is the discussion has to be had between the two people about what can and can't go down.
Thank you.
But let me be real. These three plus me, we're nasty. You seem very middle of the road.
I'm pretty vanilla.
Probably vanilla. Do you have conversations with your partner prior to actual intercourse?
No. Very rare.
See, she's cool.
Very rare.
Oh, she's cool. Right. She's just going to let you take advantage of her. So my question to you is, why do you think we don't do that?
I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I guess it's, it's realistic. It's the society that we're in, and it's like what we're used to, and it's kind of normal just to have sex without having a big discussion about it. I'm not saying that's right.
No, but I would like to talk to you, Isobel. I would like to talk to you about what I've been thinking about.
We're gonna corner you we're gonna find you backstage, girl.
You're gonna smash her.
She looks so conservative, right? Like she's like she got straight A's in school, right?
Couple things I've learned. Firstly, that I have incredibly boring sex. Secondly, that even with this incredibly progressive audience, that there does seem to be genuine confusion around the topic of consent. And so it's obviously a massive grey area.
It's hard for people to accept. It's hard for people to say, oh shit, maybe I did that wrong. And I think what adds to that is that we live in a sensationalized media world that wants to drag people. As soon as they try to apologize or say, oh shit, I realize I did it wrong. I sometimes become frustrated with how the Me Too movement has moved so far away from what it started as. An opportunity for us to call attention to youth of color in disenfranchised communities that experienced physical assault. And now it's like, is Aziza Ansarian really guilty? And then I'm reminded, are you compromising that survivor's experience? Because trauma is experienced by every single person differently. Like what you might identify as trauma, I might be like, girl, that's Tuesday.
So what do you think is the truth in the Aziz Ansari case?
I think there's a lot of truths. But I think the overall truth is that our society has groomed both men and women not to communicate appropriately about sex.
In the 1970s and 80s, the campaign Take Back the Night emerged on college campuses, laying out the unambiguous message that no means no when it comes to sexual encounters. But the problem with that is that anything apart from no could by default mean yes, which is why many universities across the country are now instating affirmative consent policies where only a clear verbal yes actually means yes.
What do you feel about affirmative consent? You know, needing to have a yes, a solid yes, before you move ahead with anything?
Make your dick get soft.
If your dick can't withstand a simple question, then it should wilt, like the shitty flower that it is.
If you're asking at every step during a sexual experience, do I have your permission to kiss you? Do I have your permission to take off your underwear? That's definitely gonna kill the vibe.
You gotta flow into the moment, man. You ain't out here just like, oh, can I touch your titty? Can I touch your pussy? Like, ain't nobody got time for that shit.
I think it would be better to be awkward than to be in the wrong.
You gotta read those signs, I guess. And that's what's hard for me is reading those signs.
We're at Northeastern University in Boston, about to go and meet Dr. Lisa Barrett, who is a neuroscientist who can help us understand how the way that our brains work actually create confusion around consent.
This study was designed to figure out when we influence your physical state in a particular way, how does that change the way that you see other people?
Okay.
All right.
Anything feel like it's chugging or pulling?
No, it feels completely normal.
All right, great.
This test attempts to measure the theory that our mood influences what we see.
If we feel good, then we tend to judge others more positively. I was asked to rate neutral faces on likability, reliability, and trustworthiness. But unknown to my conscious mind, flashing images of scowling or smiling faces were shown split seconds before to influence my answers, which were then recorded along with my heart rate and perspiration.
Looking at your skin conductance, there are specific peaks a couple of seconds after you were faced with probably a scowling face would be my guess.
Really?
Yeah. It was a change in your gut feelings. Basically, when you're in a pleasant state, you think someone with a neutral face is more trustworthy, and when you're in an unpleasant state, you think the person is less trustworthy. These are beautiful results from a scientific standpoint. From
my standpoint, not so great.
Well, what I always tell people is, as a scientist, I love results like this. As a human person, I find them horrifying, actually.
Yeah, that's terrifying. How does us guessing or misreading people, how does that play out in a sexual encounter?
If your desire is to have sex with someone, you are more likely to interpret, to perceive actions as signaling intent.
Isn't it dangerous to excuse bad behavior because we're saying that this is just the way that our brains work?
I want to be really clear. I'm not talking about sexual harassment or rape. We're talking about misunderstandings that happen between two adults who are capable of giving their consent. To say that one person could believe that they had been given consent and another person believes that they really never gave it. And it really is possible for both of those things to be true, even when everybody has the best intentions.
So is the solution to have constant verbal consent?
It could be the difference between a really great experience and a really horrible experience.
Communication is key. But how do we handle the countless situations where miscommunication has caused harm?
I am living with my traumas every single day and every single moment. I cannot imagine for a second that any of the people that have hurt me struggle with that or deal with that or move through the world any differently because of that.
If there was a way for them to apologize to the people, directly to the people that they hurt.
Would I feel more calm about it? Would I feel healed by having that done? I don't know. But I think for some people, absolutely.
I would like to sit down with the person who hurt me and have that conversation. If I had the opportunity to do so, I would take it.
If I think about reaching out to the people that I've personally been in these situations with, it's just incredibly awkward and uncomfortable conversations to have. So I'm really curious to know how people are actually able to instigate these conversations and what they look like in reality. We met a woman named Alexis and a man we've agreed to call James. They're embracing a simple yet radical idea, talking out their sexual encounter face to face. So about 10 years ago, James and Alexis were at college together and they wound up having sex. That is an event that James put down to being a drunken encounter that both of them were responsible for. And that is what he's believed for the last 9.5 years or so, and which Alexis puts down to being rape.
As we get into this, I'd like to remind you about what restorative justice is.
Leading that conversation, Professor Alyssa Ackerman, an advocate for a method called restorative justice.
Alexis reached out to me about 9 months ago, asking for somebody to facilitate a restorative justice process for her.
What is restorative justice?
So restorative justice focuses on the harm that is caused, not a particular statute violation. These types of cases involve everyday people who really don't understand the depths of the harm that they've caused.
By going through this restorative justice, allowing perpetrators to have a voice in all this, are we not excusing them?
So I actually think that this holds them more accountable than the criminal justice process does. The fact of the matter is that for every 1,000 rapes committed in this country, only 6 people will go to prison. This offers an opportunity for survivors to get what they actually say that they need, which is a voice, some validation, and the ability to tell their story in a place that they're safe.
Alexis reached out to Alyssa for help nearly a year ago. At James's request, we've agreed to obscure both of their faces.
You were the one that initiated this restorative justice process. Why and how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think it was just a last-ditch effort. Like, I'd done every kind of therapy and thought every kind of thought, and it still just wasn't doing it. And, I don't know, it was just like, fuck it. And he had, like, the missing piece of this puzzle, and that was just what I needed, you know, to not have it hurt the same way.
Do you have that email that you first sent to him?
I do, yeah. So I wrote, I wonder if you're forced to think about it every day like I am. I wonder if you know how it feels trying to stop crying on the way to work when Weinstein and Ailes and Brock Turner just keep winning. I wonder if you know about the years of therapy and a decade of panic attacks, or when the doctors told me I'd probably be managing the PTSD for the rest of my life. I wonder if you know what it feels like when your body takes over, when it contorts into panic and you lose control of your breath, but your brain can't override the system. I never get to forget, because even when I do, my body remembers. I wonder if you know what happened back then, that I dropped out of school, that I fled from everything I knew, that I had now come to distrust, and that finally I attempted suicide. But probably the worst part of all of it is that I wonder if you know that it's in your power to put a stop to this for me. It's always been in your power. You could still say you're sorry today. You could fix this at any moment. We could sit down and figure out how to heal together. I can never change what happened, but you can start to repair the damage any day you want.
On the receiving side of that email, James, who at one time considered Alexis one of his best friends. He asked us to alter his real voice.
Alexis reached out to you a few months ago. How did you feel when you received that email?
It completely stopped me in my tracks. I was walking down the street and I stood there and read it over and over again. Her being so honest really brought me to the table and made me realize that I need to deal with this. This is, I owe it to this person. My friends and family cautioned me against speaking with Alexis or being honest with her or even communicating with her. But I care a lot about this process and I care a lot about Alexis, so ultimately, that's why I'm here.
I think in terms of basic details, I remember that we'd been drinking a lot, and someone, I can't remember exactly who or how they were brought there, but we had pot brownies. I remember, you went to your room, I went to my room, but I was so passed out at this point. And I just remember these flashes of a face above me, but it didn't make sense. And then there was like little things like, I remember finding underwear in my room, and I told myself it was a dream and that the things I thought I had seen and imagined just couldn't be real. Like really not wanting to face the next level of this line of questioning.
There's a lot that I don't remember, how I got into your room, why I came into your room, when it happened, any of those details. The first memories I have are of me being on top of you in your bed. And that experience, I was able to normalize it because I just want to be careful with the words I use, but you were active in the process in the sense that you weren't unconscious. And so for that image and that memory of that portion of it was what allowed me to call it sex for 9 years. When it had been established kind of through our friends that you felt this was rape and that I had felt this was a drunken sexual experience. And I wasn't ready to have that conversation with myself. I was a good person. How could I possibly do that to you, to one of my best friends? And that opinion was validated by, friends of mine.
It became the default was to believe you. And I became this source of problem in our community, this source of like a incongruity. No one could imagine you. I didn't want to see you like this. No one could imagine you like this. And it was easier to dismiss it. And so by default, everyone believed you. And you didn't have to do anything or change anything. And you got to keep everything the way it was. And I had to leave everything and leave everybody.
One of my biggest regrets throughout all of this is, in addition to, hurting you that night and causing that trauma, I had 10 years of opportunities to write that. And I discarded you in this process, and
thank you for saying that.
This whole interaction is pretty incredible to watch. I mean, it's so raw and emotional and brutally, brutally honest and human. I mean, these guys are just sitting, having a very simple conversation, and it's an incredibly difficult conversation to have. And yet there's so much humanity and somehow understanding and forgiveness here.
I realized that we haven't called it what it is. Maybe we should be calling it what it is. I wonder if you can do that.
For the longest time, I didn't see it as how I see it now. And, to answer your question, yeah, it was rape. That's not easy to say, both because I know what it's done to you, and I know there's a flash of fear every time I associate with it.
At that point in time, there was just two words for this. There was just victim and rapist, and I don't think either of us wanted to be either of those things. I didn't think you were a bad person. I thought you had done a bad thing.
And Alexis, for you, the decision to do this was an easy one. But when you were asked to do it in shadow, that was very, very hard for you.
Yeah, it was really difficult. If my healing process is one of embodying even the worst things that have happened to me and embodying who I have become since then and what I have become, this was like a step in the opposite direction. But we're not really moving the needle at all until men start doing it. And your words have the potential to reach any other man and show that there's a path to taking responsibility. This feels better to appreciate the fact that we all have the capacity to harm, and we all have the capacity to be harmed.
Restorative justice isn't a solution for everyone. For some, confronting an assailant does not equal justice. For others, admitting to actions that could have real criminal consequences is out of the question. But at least for Alexis and James, it is providing the beginning of a way forward. And as disturbing and transformative as the last year of frenzied media coverage has been, what so many of us want is an opportunity to redefine our culture. Even if we can't change the past, maybe then we won't have to repeat it.